speak quickly, or if you don't understand my accent, just hold up your hand and make me stop or make me slow down. You can't do that yet. And if you can't hear me, I can speak louder. I'm afraid that I'll speak too loudly. I have slides to go through. I am not going to be highly technical, but I want to go through them quickly so that we have plenty of time for questions. I'm going to give myself 20 minutes on this is the only thing that keeps me in line. The whole idea of hugging is very, very important. The whole idea of hugging is very, very deep in our culture, in cultures, because this is a multicultural environment. When I first went to an Ebola outbreak, which was in April in Guinea, people were shaking hands, and then when I went into the area where the virus was spreading, everyone was standing back, and it was a big deal. You couldn't touch anybody. By the time I went to Sierra Leone a few months later for my second trip for the Ebola epidemic, nobody touched. And in fact, people would just do this. They wouldn't even bump elbows, which is what we started doing in Guinea. So you have an entire part of Africa right now where people don't touch, they don't hug. And you realize that we've had a major shift in culture because of an infectious disease. I'm going to try to demystify. I want you to understand a little more about this. It is a frightening disease, but the idea is not to be frightening. The idea is to be cautious and intelligent about it. I'm going to talk about the two countries first, because epidemics are always happening within a context of a time, a place, and a culture. And that's important to know. And the main thing you need to know is that the Republic of Guinea and Sierra Leone are very poor countries. Even though Guinea is about the size of the UK, Sierra Leone is about the size of Panama or Ireland, the populations are small. 12 million people in Guinea, half that many people in Sierra Leone. But when you look at the health infrastructure, there's only one physician for every 10,000 people in Guinea. And Sierra Leone is even worse. After their 11-year civil war that they've never really recovered from, there are only 2 physicians per 100,000 people. So you don't have a health infrastructure like you would in Europe or in America. The evil star of this whole story is the Ebola virus. And this virus is from the Ebola viruses have 5 different species. We're talking about Ebola Zaire, which is the one that was discovered years ago in Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. This disease has an incubation period of between 2 and 21 days. It's normally about 7 to 10 days, so it's like getting the flu. You get exposed to it, you feel fine. About a week later, you start to have a fever, you start to have a stomach ache, and I'll talk to you about the signs and symptoms later. But unlike the flu and unlike colds, this has a case fatality ratio, or a case fatality rate, of between 41 and 89%. And realize that when you see the cases that are flown to Europe or America, we're having a very, very good batting average of saving people's lives. But in the context of a country where you have one physician per 10,000 or 50,000 people, most of these people will die from this disease, up to 90% if they don't get health care rapidly. There are no approved vaccines or treatments at this time. What we have to do with people is support them. If they're losing fluids, we give them fluids. If they're losing electrolytes, we give them electrolytes. There are stories that you can read in the media about new drugs and new vaccines that are being developed, and this could really change the whole picture of Ebola. When we look at now I'm an epidemiologist, and that means what I do is I count things. So we look at people, and we look at the people who come in, the people who are diagnosed, and we look at their clinical signs and symptoms and say, well, how did you feel? Did you have diarrhea? Didn't you have diarrhea? And when WHO, the World Health Organization, looked at the first 9 months of this epidemic, this is what they saw. Now remember, these don't add up to 100 because people come in with more than one sign and symptom. But most of them presented with fever and then gastrointestinal signs like diarrhea, vomiting, intense fatigue, and this is more than malaria, which people are used to. They really could barely move. They were so tired out. And the last one that you see on there, hemorrhage, it looks small because it's 18%, but that's almost 1 out of 5 people would have either a nosebleed or bleeding from their mouth or bleeding in their diarrhea or other places. By the time you reach that stage of this disease, it's very, very bad. This is the ecology. This is what we understand. This is where I fit in to the story about Ebola virus. Because I am a public health veterinarian who is at an agricultural organization. And you can see that this disease is where a virus jumps from wildlife into domestic or animals that are close to the human populations. And then what happens over to the right, where you see the family, is that you have what's called a spillover event. And this is where the virus takes a leap for unknown reasons into the human population. Once that happens, don't worry about that gorilla or that chimp. Don't worry about that duiker or that antelope that's there. That's done. Somewhere a year ago, probably October or November, this virus spilled over into an animal that a hunter probably was cleaning and got exposed to the blood that had the virus in it, and then transmitted that to humans. The earliest case we know about was a 2-year-old child near to Gekadu in Guinea who got sick last December. And then he died, his 3-year-old sister died, his grandmother and his mother died in rapid succession. And then what happened was one of them was taken to a hospital and it exploded because healthcare workers got sick. They unknowingly transmitted it to other people in the hospital and community, and the epidemic went on. This is where we've historically seen outbreaks of Marburg virus or Ebola virus. So these are all the filoviruses. And you'll notice that most of them are over on the right-hand side. They're in East Africa or they're in Central Africa. And you can see the dates. And this is all on the web. It's very, very unusual to see an outbreak in West Africa. And that's one of the reasons why we were totally unprepared for Ebola virus to emerge in West Africa. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is up here where it says Gekadu and the countries near there. When we're fighting Ebola virus, we have a lot of challenges. I mean, obviously there are a lot of challenges because this epidemic has been out of control now for probably 10 months. It's in reality probably a year. We need to find cases early. Hospitals, as I mentioned, funerals, and any large gathering of people are places where the virus can explode. The tradition in this part of the world is people touch a lot. They shake hands, they hug. When somebody dies, they wash the body of the person who died, which is a culture that we have too. We don't just dump people in the ground. After they do that, a lot of people go and they embrace the departed person. The scary part about this virus is that the blood, the sweat, and anything else that's on the body, like diarrhea or vomitus or whatever as the person is dying, can be filled with virus. And all somebody needs to do is touch them and hug them or whatever, and then rub their eye or pick their nose or anything like that, and they're infecting themselves. And that's how the virus. This virus is very clever at taking advantage of the love and the affection that we have for each other. And this is not only in West Africa. This is a universal problem that we have. We like each other. We need to set up good hospital care. We need to do it fast, and we need good laboratory support. We need to separate the people who actually have Ebola virus and the people who come in with just a headache and diarrhea, because a lot of things can cause that. We need to protect healthcare givers, because they're the front line. They're the ones who can stop this epidemic, but they're also the ones who are most exposed to the virus in its purest form. Because if anyone's going to be there exposed to blood, it's going to be the nurses who are on the front line. So when you hear about the people who are out there doing this work, and I'm talking mostly about the Africans who are out there in their communities, who stay in their hospitals, these are really brave, courageous, and caring people. It's remarkable to me that people stay in their posts in an outbreak like this. Communications are essential. There are a lot of myths. There are a lot of rumors that go on associated with Ebola virus that we have to stop. We also have to teach people to not touch. We also have to teach people to get people who are ill to the hospital quickly. Breaking transmission depends on trust and cooperation, and that is not always present in these communities. We are very good at understanding and taking care of Ebola virus disease, but we do not know how to control Ebola panic disease. And that includes people in the United States who are now saying that they can no longer have flights come in from Mali. There are no flights from Mali to the United States. But there are people who have set up these rules. I just got my email this morning from the CDC that people who transit through Europe and who originated in Mali or any West African country with Ebola have to go through special screening at the airport. And this is really not a medical procedure as much as it is to try to calm the people who have Ebola panic. It is a frightening disease, and partly because it's been Hollywoodized in movies like this, where you have, I can't even remember, Dustin Hoffman and the other guys in their spacesuits and coming out. My favorite is this one. It was from, I think, Contagion, because the guy who's putting a poster on says the CDC lies, which is always nice to know for me. But this is actually what people see in the media, and this is what people see on the streets. They do see people wearing all of this personal protective equipment, includting aprons, including face masks where you can't see the eyes of the person who's treating you. They see them carrying dead bodies out of the hospital, and so it all goes beyond reason. And we're trying to be reasonable. Remember, everybody, Africa is a big continent. Those little countries you see on the side are where the epidemic is out of control. If somebody comes from South Africa, if somebody comes from Kenya, hug them. Tomorrow, when they're wearing a green badge, hug them. Don't worry about it. In fact, if they come from any of these countries and they're not ill, hug them. The thing that we have to know about Ebola is that unlike diseases like influenza and the common cold, where you're most infectious before you start showing clinical signs, with Ebola, you are not infectious when you're feeling all right, even if you're incubating the virus. The virus comes out at the time that it's really causing a lot of signs, like vomiting, diarrhea, bleeding, and all of these other signs. So don't worry about people here in Italy having Ebola disease. The way that we fight Ebola is through complex groups of people getting together. I just give you an idea of what the task force looks like in the countries I've worked in. There are presidential task forces because it's run by the country, ministries. MSF is Médecins Sans Frontières. It's Doctors Without Borders. They've been fantastic, as have Red Cross and other organizations, a lot of volunteer organizations. The United Nations organizations are in there, and the others that you see here. I have deep respect for them. And in fact, I'm happy that they sent military in. The British military are in Sierra Leone, the American military are in Liberia, and I think the French are going to send military to Guinea. What they can offer is putting up hospitals very, very quickly, getting ambulances moving very quickly, getting clean water where it needs to be, making sure that things that have to be incinerated, like clothing and medical equipment, are incinerated. They're really good. This gives you an idea of what MSF does. They can set up hospitals like this in a matter of days. They have very good laboratories. They do wear a lot of protective equipment that's frightening to look at, but they are protecting themselves, and they're really good. They are having a problem right now getting enough volunteers to go out because this epidemic is so big. Red Cross, I also have deep respect for. They've been fantastic. Where I worked, they were running ambulances, and they were doing the work of going to villages where there was someone who died, and then helping the community to bury that person. And you have to bury someone with dignity. You don't just carry them off in a bag and throw them in a hole. You need to be extremely culturally sensitive. You need to really work with the community, and that's what they've done. And this is a health education session that I was a part of. So in April and May, I was in Guinea. And Guinea, for me at that time, was all about chlorine, chlorine, and chlorine. Everywhere you went, you were being washed with chlorine. This first one on this side here is a terrible example. They had a bucket with dirty water in it, and a little, what they call a bidon, a little plastic teapot that had pure chlorine in it. So my clothes are all splattered with chlorine stains, and my hands were all burned. The guy with the little bottle was the best. He sat outside of the clinic and he made sure that people washed their hands. And the last one is a woman who just poked holes in the top of a chlorine bottle, and we're putting pure bleach on people's hands as they walked into the health clinic. It's gotten much, much better, partially because we spent a lot of time with this coordination and training. So the fellow you see on the right with the vest and the blue, he's from Gabon. He's a physician I work with. And we went into clinics and talked to healthcare workers about protecting themselves, about recognizing the disease, and about what to do when they saw Ebola virus. And community mobilization is really the key to stopping this disease. And this woman here is Madame Sia, the woman who's talking. And she's unbelievable. Madame Sia and women like her were out there in villages 7 days a week, literally. And in some of these villages, you were chased out by people with machetes and with stones who were saying, "We don't want you here. You're bringing the disease to us." And that was part of the fright that people have. When I was in Guinea, these were the issues we had to deal with. It was all about trust. People are extremely poor, and they have very bad health care. Suddenly people show up with these yellow suits and these white suits with face masks, and they say, "We're going to help you." These people take away your sick child, and you never see your child again. This is very, very frightening. And to build trust in a situation like that is not easy. These populations are frequently marginalized. Tribes and villages don't trust each other. There's a strong belief in sorcery, so people see this as being sorcery, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the real challenge is, how do we build trust? And how do we get cooperation? How do we get people to work together? And it's very much like taking the homophobe and the gay person and saying, "Look, for one day, can you hug each other? Just try that. You won't die." In this case, we really had to build trust in the same way, but in a much, much more urgent fashion. For me, when I'm working with communities like this, and in all the work that I do, I realize that we all live in a spiritual universe. We have a spiritual universe that we don't even think about because it's so much a part of us. We have belief systems that we just take for granted. Now, you're in a multicultural school and a multicultural society. You understand a little bit about this. But realize that we all choose which ghosts we're going to believe in. And some people believe that there are ghosts in the forest. And when they see things like this, they see people walking like this really reinforces the idea that ghosts that appear in the forest take away your mother and you never see her again. And that's it. And then there are some of us who believe in viruses. But the fact is, I've never seen a ghost. I probably have seen a ghost, but I've never seen a virus because I don't have an electron microscope. So it's a leap of faith on my part that I believe that there's a virus that's causing this disease, because I've never seen it. So when I work with somebody who says, "No, this is being caused by ghosts and spirits in the forest," that's valid. I work with that. That's the spiritual universe we work in. If I'm going to start giving someone a lecture about nucleotides or amino acids, forget it. We're never going to find a place to meet. This is the sort of crappy health education materials that I saw when I first got there. It was all in French. It's dense language for people who speak Kissi. They don't speak French, and there's no written Kissi language. The posters got better as we went along, where it was mostly based on pictures and simple things like, if you're feeling sick, go to the health clinic. But a big part of that was that the health clinics had to have medicine when you got there, and they didn't at first. So this epidemic, the virus, was moving along through society. We were telling people, go to the health clinic. They would go to the health clinic, but there was no doctor there. Or they would go to the health clinic and the doctor was there, but there was no medicine. So really underneath this, poverty is really driving this thing forward. In August, I went back, I went to Sierra Leone, and in fact, I'm leaving on Wednesday for Sierra Leone for another month. So all of these, I go for a month at a time. So when I was in Sierra Leone, it was different. By that time, no one was touching. People wouldn't even bump elbows. They were just holding their heart, and they would say, good morning. They would say, how are you? There were hospitals, they had things, they had really nice buckets with water, and people were careful about diluting their chlorine down. Chlorine, that's my 20 minutes, so I'll talk even faster. Chlorine, alcohol, all those hand rub gels, they all work really, really well against Ebola. So don't worry about that. Even this is a picture of me on the side of a road where they just had buckets, where they have these bottles, these jerry cans, where you would step on the wood stick and it would pour on your hands, and then that way you didn't have to touch anything. And as we moved through Sierra Leone in August and in September, you couldn't even drive down the road without a pass that said that you were part of the Ebola response. And we were checked probably every 10 kilometers at least by somebody who was using a thermometer that doesn't have to touch, you don't have to touch the person, and anyone with a fever is being taken to a health clinic. Now, because my second trip was for FAO, we were concerned about food, and this is rice growing in Sierra Leone, and this is cocoa being dried. The problem is that if you can't drive down the road, if people are afraid to go to the market, in fact, markets were closed, if people can't work together in groups because they're afraid to touch each other, the entire agricultural structure, meaning the harvest from last year and the planting for next year, are not going to happen. And so we're looking at an epidemic that's so broad that it's affecting the economy, the agriculture, and every aspect of society in these poor countries. And yet, when we stopped for fuel on the road, there were always people there to sell food, hard-boiled eggs and bananas. So life goes on, and people do keep working, and they do keep the society going in spite of all of these threats. This is Sierra Leone. They were building bigger hospitals. This is MSF building a hospital. And part of my job was to talk to large groups of people. We would talk to people who we were hoping would pass the message on to communities. This is in a place called Port Loco. Unfortunately, we got there when there were few cases of Ebola, but we were afraid that this was going to be the next hotspot, and it did become the next hotspot in Sierra Leone. But even young musicians, these are hip-hop musicians, came out. And you can see on YouTube there are some really good videos of Liberian and Sierra Leonean musicians who did songs about Ebola. The whole of society is working together. This is the sort of thing that I do here. These are numbers. You can see the numbers are going up. They're still going up in all three countries. And it can be displayed slightly differently here with these spot maps that are showing you where the virus is. And all of this is available, far too available probably in the media for you. But I want to tell you one thing that's important. When I showed you the map in the beginning, I showed you that most of these cases were in East Africa and Central Africa. This disease was really raging in Uganda, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And if we look at what's happened since the year 2010 in Uganda, I think you'll understand how we fight disease. With CDC support, the government of Uganda set up laboratories. They created 12 surveillance sites. They made standard reporting forms, and they made it very easy to do laboratory testing and to get people out. And since that time, if you can see this, all of the outbreaks that have occurred in Uganda since 2010 have been very limited, both in time and in the number of people who have become ill. So we don't have a vaccine against this disease, but if you can diagnose it quickly and respond quickly, you can stop this disease from occurring.
Did the Ebola outbreak influence the biological diversity of the livestock?
With livestock, okay, so this is a really good question, because this is why FAO is involved with this. This is a disease that's not, mainly this lives in the bat population, spills over into other animals. And the answer is No, we haven't seen any big die-off of primates, which we've seen in other countries. So we've had a case in Gabon and in Congo where there were actually die-offs. People found lots of chimpanzees and gorillas in the forest that were dead, and we found that they were dead from Ebola virus. In this case, we haven't found them. In this case, there seems to have been one spillover event. It got into the human population and took off.
By how much had the Ebola virus affected the economy?
We're analyzing that right now. It's interesting because there are ups and downs with this. There's an entire economy that's being built around this response effort. So there are actually people who profit from this. A lot of NGOs are getting involved with people who are supplying things for the response. But on the other side, for agriculture, it's been devastating. For small farmers who have not been able to harvest their crops or to sell them once they've harvested them. It's a country, Sierra Leone I'm talking about now, because that's where I've been mostly involved lately. In Sierra Leone, they don't really have ways to store vegetables. So after they've harvested the vegetables, they take them to the market, and if they don't sell them in 2 days, they're rotten. And it's in the tropics. So it's very difficult. So those people are suffering a lot. So the economy is up and down. Overall, this is going to be devastating. The tourism, you can imagine, is gone. Hotels, restaurants are shutting down or have shut down. And in fact, Air France, British Airways, and KLM and other airlines that used to fly to these countries don't even fly there anymore. So the economic impact has been really bad for most people.
Can Ebola be transmitted through food?
Through food? No. And especially, well let's look at it slightly differently because it's a good question. If what I'm doing is going out in the forest and hunting, and I find a sick chimpanzee, and I decide we're going to eat that chimpanzee, and I get exposed to the blood, and that has Ebola virus in it. The same thing with bats, the same thing with duikers, which are the small antelopes. I could get exposed to the virus, and I could transmit that to other people. So that, it's not really eating the food that we're worried about, but it's cleaning the animals before you eat them. Most of the people who are getting sick now are people in cities, people who are not exposed to wildlife at all. And everything that we know about this epidemic points to no food, no animals after that first event